Hey there, viewers. Sometimes it only takes one sentence to shift the entire room, and today it came from Diddy's own son. Right in the middle of the hearing, he stood up and said something that stopped everything. And after that, there was no going back. Let's get into it. Chapter 1. The boy in the back row. I've sat through more of these hearings than I care to count. Same dull beige walls, same humming light overhead that flickers every now and then like it's got something to say but never quite does. My name doesn't matter in this story. I'm just one of the people they assign to sit in the corner, take notes, pass messages, and stay quiet. Court clerk level 2, technically, but nobody calls me that. Most people just snap their fingers at me when they need water or a form. That's fine. I've always been the kind of person who watches more than she speaks. That's probably why I noticed him first. He sat in the back row, 5th seat from the right, closest to the wall. Hooded sweatshirt, clean jeans, plain sneakers. Everything about him looked neutral. Too neutral. His hands were clenched on his lap so tight his knuckles had gone a pale kind of white. But his face was calm. Not bored, not anxious, just steady. Like he was waiting for something. At first, I thought he was a junior lawyer waiting for his supervisor to show. Happens all the time. They'll sit in and watch pre-trial hearings like it's a live class. But then I checked the attendance list on the printout Judge O'Malley had initialed that morning. No match for the name he gave the front desk. And I mean no match. I tried to play it off and asked one of the guards, Hawkins, to confirm. He walked over real casual, leaned down and murmured something. The kid looked up and said something back, quiet but clear, then handed over an ID. Hawkins squinted at it, muttered, "He's just observing," and walked off. I raised an eyebrow at him later and he just shrugged. Said he's clean, said he's studying law or something. I didn't push it. Still, something about him bothered me. He wasn't studying anything. He wasn't even pretending to. He hadn't looked away from Diddy since he walked in. We'd already been in the courtroom an hour by then. Just pretrial motions, nothing that dramatic. The defense was pushing to have more names redacted from upcoming witness lists, citing safety concerns. Diddy's lawyer kept throwing the word unverified around like it meant irrelevant. He never looked nervous. Neither did Diddy, not at first. But about 15 minutes after that boy sat down, the air changed. I'm not being poetic, it changed. Like something was pressing in through the walls that nobody else wanted to admit was there. And for the first time since this whole case started, Diddy turned around. Not a full turn, just a glance quick, sharp, backward, over his shoulder, right at the kid. Their eyes met. Now, I've seen a lot of courtroom stares, rage, grief, even smugness, but what passed between them wasn't anything I could name. Diddy's face went flat, not scared, not angry, just stunned. The kind of look people get when they see something that was supposed to be buried. And the boy didn't blink, not once, not in all the time I watched him after that. Across the room, the attorneys kept talking, none the wiser. The judge kept flipping through motions, but I started feeling that tightness in my gut, the kind that always shows up right before something big hits. The boy didn't move, didn't fidget, didn't check a phone or glance at the clock, just stared. Sometime around 3:40, I saw one of the officers, Martinez, one of the digital review guys, step out, holding a tablet. He came back 5 minutes later, visibly rattled. I couldn't hear what he said, but he leaned in close to the bailiff at the door and kept gesturing toward the back row, something about not alone and wasn't on camera before checkpoint. Later, after everything went sideways, I found out what had gotten him so shaken. Martinez had pulled the hallway footage, and in it the boy didn't walk in by himself like the logbook said. There was a man with him. Older, maybe mid-60s, tall, wearing a dark overcoat and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low. They passed through the outer lobby together. The older man never looked up at the camera, and right before the metal detectors, he turned down the side hall and disappeared. No exit record, no ID scan. It's like he just evaporated. We didn't know any of that yet, though. Back in the courtroom, the judge was wrapping up for the day. Everyone started gathering their papers, murmuring about schedule changes and evidentiary protocols. The boy still hadn't moved. Then, just as the defense was requesting one last procedural delay, I felt movement near me. I turned, and there he was. The boy, standing maybe 2 feet away. I don't startle easy, but he was just there. No noise, no warning. He held out a plain white envelope. No name, no markings, just thick enough to feel heavy, but not by much. He looked at me straight in the eye and said, "If anything happens to me, give this to the judge, only him, no one else." Then he walked away. I didn't even have time to ask his name again. He was already at the doors by the time I stepped into the aisle. Hawkins moved to stop him, but the judge waved him off, assuming he was just another observer leaving early. I looked down at the envelope. My hands were shaking. No one else seemed to notice what had just happened, but I did. I felt it. Because I glanced back at Diddy right before the boy left the room, and I swear to you his face had gone gray. Not pale, gray, like something dead had crawled up behind his eyes. His mouth moved like he wanted to say something, but nothing came out. And as that boy walked through the courtroom doors, Diddy looked down at the table in front of him and just kept staring. I waited until after the room emptied to open the bottom drawer of my desk. I slid the envelope inside and locked it with the tiny brass key I'd barely used since I got promoted. It's funny. Some people spend their whole careers trying to make moments like this about themselves, but I knew right then this story wasn't mine to tell. Not really. I was just the girl who held the envelope. But still, I had a feeling that the courtroom, hell, maybe even the whole damn case, had just changed, and I wasn't wrong. Sealed testimony and missing files. By the time the court recessed, my head was spinning. The envelope the boy handed me was still locked in the bottom drawer of my desk, but I could feel its weight like it was made of stone. Every time I leaned down or shifted in my seat, it was like I could hear it, like it wanted out. That might sound strange, I know, but that courtroom has a way of making the smallest things feel bigger. Every whisper becomes a scream if you sit still long enough. I waited until the last of the attorneys had filed out and the guards were doing their usual sweep. That's when I carried the envelope, clutched tight against my chest, down the east hallway to Judge O'Malley's chambers. His assistant looked up like she was about to ask me something, but the second she saw the look on my face, she just nodded and opened the door. No questions. Smart woman. Inside, the judge was scribbling on a legal pad, glasses low on his nose, halfway through what looked like a late lunch he hadn't touched. When I told him where the envelope came from and what the boy said, his hand froze mid-sentence. No snide remarks, no raised eyebrows, just a quiet, grim nod as he reached for the letter opener on the corner of his desk and carefully broke the seal. The air in the room changed the second the papers came out. I watched his face, not just his eyes, but his jaw, his shoulders, the way his breathing slowed. The first page was a printed document, medical in format. Familiar layout, at least to me. I'd seen enough birth records, DNA results, and hospital affidavits to recognize the structure even before reading the words. The judge's lips moved silently as he read, mouthing names and numbers, dates of conception, and paternity percentage. There it was in black and white, 99.9% match. The boy wasn't just claiming Diddy as a father. He had evidence, test results signed by a certified lab, and the date on the form was no more than 6 months old. Underneath that were photographs. A few were time-stamped. One showed the boy as a child, 7, maybe 8, standing at the edge of what looked like a yacht's upper deck. His face was half-turned, caught mid-motion, but it was him. You could tell by the eyes. In the background, part of Diddy's face was visible, laughing at something just out of frame. There were other pictures too, some more grainy, some taken through windows or fences. But the clearest ones, the ones that made the judge's hand tremble slightly, were the images of the boy in different houses. Same architecture, same color palette, same furniture patterns repeating across multiple cities. Miami, Anguilla, West Hollywood, the kind of homes you don't find listed anywhere. They're not on maps or rental sites. They don't have visible addresses, but they exist. Some of us in the system knew about them, whispered about them, places people visited and never talked about again. And then came the letter. 4 pages, handwritten, neat, deliberate penmanship, no embellishments, just facts, cold, terrible facts. It wasn't just a plea, it was a record. The writer described being relocated multiple times throughout their youth, claimed the mother, no name given, had tried to speak to someone in 2013, a lawyer. There was even a specific name mentioned, but the judge covered it with his hand before I could read it. According to the letter, the woman vanished shortly after making contact. The boy had been passed between handlers since then. Not foster homes, not legal guardians, handlers. People paid to keep him quiet, sheltered, and invisible. Some were kind, some weren't. One tried to help him escape. She was reassigned after 2 weeks and never seen again. The judge didn't speak for a long while after finishing. He just sat there, the letter flat on the desk in front of him, his fingers steepled over his mouth. Then, with a sudden flicker of movement, he reached for the phone on the corner of his desk and hit a private line I'd only ever seen used once before. I stepped outside before the conversation began, but I heard enough to know what came next wasn't routine. A request for a full background check on the boy, flagged confidential and urgent, cross-checking birth records, any sealed family court documents from the past 20 years, any connection to ongoing investigations marked as high security. I returned to my desk after that, feeling like I'd just stepped out of a dream. The court was due to reconvene in under an hour. I spent the entire time replaying what I'd seen, the boy's face, the envelope, the photographs, the percentages. It was a strange sensation, walking back into that courtroom knowing what I knew. Like I was carrying a secret no one else could feel but me and the judge. But something was already different. Diddy was tense. I don't mean annoyed or impatient. I mean visibly uncomfortable. His leg bounced under the table. His hands kept fidgeting with the corner of a document that had already been signed and sealed 2 days ago. The defense attorney leaned in more than once, whispering so closely into Diddy's ear that their foreheads almost touched. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw the look Diddy gave him. Sharp, panicked, the beginning of something unraveling. Not the man we'd watched these past few weeks. Something was slipping, and then it got worse. About 20 minutes into the second session, I was asked to retrieve a case summary from the evidence locker. Just a small formality, a Form D1, D2C, which should have been right there in box 41. But when I got there, the box was open. Not empty, but lighter. 2 files were gone. Not misplaced, not checked out. Gone. I double-checked the log. No sign-outs, no scheduled audits, and no one, not a single person on the registry, had clearance to open that drawer since the previous afternoon. I flagged it immediately. 2 guards came to verify. We filed a report, informal at first. But I knew what this meant. That locker had multiple levels of authorization. Only a handful of people had access to that drawer, including the judge, 2 clerks, and one of the attorneys on Diddy's team. Back in the courtroom, I returned to my seat, trying to pretend my hands weren't sweating through my sleeves. I watched Diddy closely, watched the way his lawyer suddenly stood and requested a brief sidebar with the judge. It was denied. Too many delays already. The schedule was tight. No more excuses. That's when the whisper happened. The lawyer leaned in again, face inches from Diddy's, and though I couldn't catch it all, I caught enough. "We might have a problem," he said, from inside. Diddy froze. His whole body, like someone had cut a wire. He turned slowly in his chair, just slightly, but enough that I could tell what he was looking for. The boy. He was back, sitting in the same row, same seat, back straight, hands calm. But this time, when their eyes met, it wasn't the boy who flinched. It was Diddy. For a split second, the man who used to swagger through these hearings like he owned the building looked haunted. Not by guilt, not even fear. It was recognition. The kind that runs deep, the kind that pulls things out of memory you thought were buried in concrete. The judge didn't announce anything, not yet, but I saw the signal, a nod to the side door, the same one officers use when something needs handling discreetly. 2 plainclothes security staff moved toward the hallway. But by the time they reached the exit near the back row, the boy was gone. No one saw him leave, no door opened, no footsteps, no sound, just gone. And on his seat, half tucked under the bench, a folded slip of paper with the judge's initials on it. Like he knew what was coming next. Chapter 3. A visit from the other nurse. MDC Brooklyn isn't like the prisons you see on TV. There's no dramatic clanging of bars, no rowdy inmates throwing trays. It's quieter than you'd expect, sterile, mechanical, a kind of enforced stillness that creeps up on you if you're in it too long. The walls hum with artificial light. The floors smell faintly of ammonia and something older, something institutional that clings to the soles of your shoes. I've only been into the medical wing a handful of times, mostly to drop off paperwork or shadow someone higher up. But everyone who works there walks like they're trying not to disturb something. That morning it was unusually quiet, even for MDC. I was in early, sipping cold coffee and reviewing the latest notes Judge O'Malley had scribbled in the margins of a sealed file from the night before. I hadn't slept right. I kept thinking about the boy in the courtroom and how fast he vanished, how deliberate he'd been. The envelope, the paper under the seat, all of it. And then the way Diddy looked at him, that pale, haunted recognition that sent something cold right through me. That wasn't a stare across a courtroom. That was something old and personal and dangerous. I couldn't shake it. Around 10:15, word came down that Diddy had been placed on the list for another medical evaluation. Continued eating refusal and erratic sleep, the slip said. Standard protocol when an inmate shows prolonged behavioral shifts. The evaluation request had the signature of a senior health supervisor I didn't recognize, but that wasn't uncommon. Sometimes the internal review system rotated in medical examiners from other facilities. No red flags. At least not at first. The assigned escort was Officer Ramsey. He's not chatty but reliable, one of those guards who always walks the line between firm and fair. He brought Diddy down to the medical wing in standard fashion, no fuss, no cuffs either per recent instructions, though Diddy had to stay within the 2-striped path on the floor at all times. Ramsey said he was calm, slower than usual, but no resistance. The exam room they used was one of the side units, not the main one with the 2-way mirror. Smaller, tighter, one metal chair bolted to the floor, another left freestanding. The walls were off-white, faintly scuffed near the corners. Standard inmate medical interview setup. Diddy sat with his head down. Ramsey waited outside the door as instructed. That's when she arrived. No one saw her enter through the main gate. No log entries, no prior appointments. She just appeared near the nurse's station, clipboard in hand, ID badge clipped to her scrubs. Scrubs weren't MDC standard green, they were pale gray. No one questioned it, not at first. When she told the attending that she was part of the internal review rotation assigned to inmate health evaluations, the desk nurse didn't blink, just pointed toward exam room 3. She walked in like she belonged. According to Ramsey, she didn't say much at first, closed the door behind her gently, introduced herself as Dr. Folth. No full name, no credentials shown beyond the badge. Said she was there under Article 14B for psychological clearance. Diddy didn't look up. He was slow to respond, lethargic, distant. Then she started asking questions. Not about medication, not about sleep, not even about his refusal to eat. She asked about the party houses. Ramsey didn't hear all of it, but the door wasn't thick, and some things carry when someone raises their voice. She asked about how many children were brought there, how many rooms had cameras, what names were used, who managed the transport, whether the initials K meant anything to him. That's when Diddy's voice changed, low at first, then angry. He demanded a lawyer, said she wasn't authorized to be in the room. She laughed. Not loud, just soft enough to be chilling. And then she handed him something. A Polaroid. Ramsey said he saw it through the small window in the door. She held it out between two fingers like she didn't want to touch it too long. Diddy stared at it for a long time, didn't say anything for several seconds. Then he went still. Ramsey said it was the stillness that made him uneasy. Diddy just stared at the photo like it had broken something inside of him. Not confusion, not denial, recognition. Eventually, he whispered, "Where did you get that?" She didn't answer. She just tucked her clipboard under one arm and said, "I'm just here to remind you not everyone stays bought." And then she left. No signature, no exit log. By the time the attending nurse realized she hadn't returned her badge or filed any notes, she was gone. The outer security footage showed nothing, no trace, like she'd never been there. Ramsey immediately filed a report, said the Polaroid was gone. Diddy refused to hand it over. When pressed by staff, he claimed the woman never gave him anything, but his hands were clenched so tightly during the follow-up exam that his knuckles were red and sore. Something was in there. They couldn't get him to open them, not even under pressure. I heard about all of it secondhand that afternoon. It took a while for the story to get to me, and even then it came in pieces. I was in the file room when the judge got the call. His face didn't change when he hung up the phone, but I noticed the way his pen trembled slightly in his grip. He leaned back in his chair and stared at the far wall for what must have been 3 minutes straight. Then, without a word, he asked me to return to the evidence room. What I found waiting there wasn't from the inventory list. It had arrived in a small manila envelope, no return address, hand-delivered at some point during the early afternoon. Inside was a thumb drive, no label, no encryption, just a plain black drive with a single year range scratched into the plastic. 199-92007. That's all it said. The judge had it scanned immediately by internal IT. No malware, no traps. Just a folder with 26 video files, each one labeled by date and a short cryptic title. None had audio at first glance. All were silent security footage, angle-fixed grainy resolution, likely shot from overhead vents or discrete wall mounts. At least 5 appeared to be taken in the same room. A dimly lit lounge with leather couches and floor-to-ceiling windows. One clip dated June 16, 2003 showed what looked like a gathering of adults seated around a low table while children milled quietly near the edges of the frame. No faces were visible in full, only fragments, blurred edges. A child's shoe, a hand reaching for a drink. But it was unmistakable. These weren't ordinary house parties. These weren't family events. One clip dated August 9, 2004, showed a child resembling the courtroom boy, younger by several years, sitting alone on a couch while an adult figure leaned down to whisper something in his ear. The child's eyes never blinked, not once during the full 8-minute clip. The footage should not have existed. Several of the homes shown in the videos had been wiped from real estate databases after being sold under offshore trusts. One property had burned down in 2011, another had been quietly demolished. Yet here they were, frozen in time. The footage was real, and someone wanted us to see it. I didn't sleep that night. Neither did the judge. We were told not to speak of the drive until verification was complete. But deep down, I knew. We all did. That woman, whoever she was, had dropped a match in a room soaked in gasoline. and by morning everything would start to burn. Chapter 4. The First Statement. You could feel it before he even spoke. Something about the air was wrong the moment I walked into the courtroom that morning. It was denser somehow, like it had been sitting still all night, waiting for everyone to return. I don't mean it was quiet. Quiet's normal in court. This was something else, like the walls themselves had started listening. Even the bailiffs moved slower, less chatter, fewer glances. Everyone had that stiff, practiced posture people adopt when they don't want to admit they're nervous. The gallery had been reduced. No public seating, no press, no sketch artists this time. The judge had issued the restriction late the night before, citing unverified threats against one of the attendees. No names given. But I didn't need names. I already knew who the threat was meant for, or maybe who the threat had come from. Diddy arrived looking different, not in clothes, those were the same issued jumpsuit and zipless shoes, but in posture. He wasn't putting on that usual half-smirk anymore, the one he wore like a shield. He sat with his elbows on the table, hands steepled near his lips, breathing slow and shallow. His lawyer tried whispering something in his ear, but Diddy didn't respond, not even a blink, just stared at the judge's bench like he was watching something no one else could see. It was the boy who changed everything. I hadn't seen him enter, nobody had, which was becoming a theme. One moment the rear bench was empty, the next he was sitting there, back straight, eyes focused forward. Same seat as before, same neutral clothes, no expression. I was starting to think that stillness was his way of announcing himself. He didn't need drama. He was the storm just by being there. We were about 30 minutes into motion discussion, mostly procedural adjustments and objections about sealed evidence when it happened. No build-up, no warning. The boy stood up. Not in a dramatic, arms-raised sort of way, just stood, straightened his back, stepped slightly into the aisle between benches. His voice when it came was clearer than I thought it would be. Not loud, but it cut through the courtroom like a sharp wind. "I never wanted to be here," he said, "but I can't watch him lie anymore." It was like someone had flipped a switch. The entire room froze. The judge, mid-sentence, stopped speaking. Diddy turned, slow, like the movement physically hurt. His eyes locked onto the boy's again, and something in him shifted. The color drained from his face, not pale, ashen, cold. He looked like someone who'd seen a ghost step out of a photograph he'd burned years ago. The boy didn't say anything else. He didn't move, just stood there in that narrow space between benches, breathing steady, arms at his sides. Diddy's lawyer shot up immediately, shouting an objection before the judge could speak, something about decorum, unauthorized statements contaminating the hearing. He demanded the boy be removed and possibly sanctioned. It was loud, aggressive, the kind of objection that's designed to scare someone into silence. But the judge didn't budge. He looked down at the bench, adjusted his glasses, and exhaled through his nose like a man who had already decided how this would play out. He glanced to his left, gave a subtle nod to the lead bailiff, and then spoke. Calm, deliberate. Remove the individual from the gallery, but do not eject him from the premises. Escort him to secure chamber 3. I'll review his admissibility privately. The defense lawyer objected again, denied, overruled. He tried appealing for a formal recess. The judge declined. The bailiff approached the boy, gently gestured toward the hallway. The boy nodded once and followed without a word. No handcuffs, no force, just a quiet exit, the kind that says, "I've been through worse." The moment the door shut behind him, Diddy pushed back from the table, just slightly, enough that his chair creaked across the floor. He brought one hand to his mouth, thumb trembling against his lower lip. For the first time since he'd been arrested, he looked like he was trying not to come apart at the seams. No one else spoke for a full minute. Then, like they couldn't help themselves, the guards near the back started whispering. I didn't catch every word, but fragments floated through the silence like loose thread. Blood pressure spiked. asked for water 3 times, said he was supposed to be gone. The judge called for an extended recess to review unanticipated developments. I knew what that meant. The boy's statement, those 12 words, had triggered something serious, something structural, a shift in the case that couldn't be walked back. Security escorted the rest of us out while the courtroom was cleared and sealed, but as I gathered my files, I saw one of the court officers pull the judge aside and whisper something urgent. The judge's face didn't change, but he nodded once, sharp and quick, like he understood exactly what was being said. Later that afternoon, the hall outside the evidence chamber was blocked off. A few of us who still had clearance were summoned for chain of custody documentation. I wasn't told why. When I arrived, one of the archivists looked visibly shaken. He was pale, hands wringing his shirt hem. He handed me a sealed envelope stamped with judicial markings I didn't recognize. It had one line written across the front in thick black ink: locate the original paternity settlement, 2010, case file reference Delta R31. Delta R31. That file hadn't been accessed in over a decade. I remembered the code because it was part of a batch that had been reported lost in a digital system migration, one of those clerical disasters that never gets fixed and quietly disappears into the void. But now someone was asking for it like they knew it should never have been lost in the first place. Here's the part that made my skin crawl. The record of that file's destruction, signed off in 2013, wasn't actually signed by a court officer. It was signed by someone from the same firm currently representing Diddy. We were digging up things that were supposed to stay buried. That evening, before leaving for the night, I saw the judge pass a sealed order to security, one I wasn't allowed to read, but I recognized the format. It was an emergency protection order, the kind usually reserved for endangered witnesses or internal whistleblowers. The boy's name wasn't on it, but his testimony was scheduled for the next morning, and this time it wouldn't be behind glass. It would be the start of something none of us were ready for. Chapter 5: The Island. The courtroom was so still that morning you could hear the static in the overhead lights. Not the kind you notice in a busy room, but the soft, crackling buzz that lives in old wiring, flickering just beneath the surface. It's the sound of silence trying not to break. They brought the boy in through the side entrance, not through the back hall, where inmates usually pass. His posture was the same, shoulders squared, eyes focused, hands clasped in front of him like they were tethering him to the floor. He didn't wear orange. Didn't wear a suit either, just plain clothes again, a light blue button-up shirt, collar frayed, sleeves rolled neatly to the elbow. No jewelry, no emotion. The only thing different was the chair they gave him, positioned center, just to the right of the witness stand, away from the jury rail and the counsel tables. Not a traditional seat. This was something built for testimony without defense interruption. There were no objections allowed today. The judge opened the session with a few lines of procedural formality, most of which no one remembered. Then he nodded once toward the boy, who sat still for another breath before speaking. "My name is sealed," he said, "but my memories aren't." What followed was 3 hours of testimony, fragmented, chilling, and impossible to dismiss. He started at the beginning. He didn't remember where he was born, just the house they were taken to afterward. A woman, soft-spoken, called herself his mother, though she never used her full name in front of others. He said she cried at night, mostly in silence, and always clutched a burner phone that only ever rang once a week. He remembered the ringtone. Said it made his stomach hurt, even now. The day that phone stopped ringing was the day she left. No warning. No suitcase, no goodbyes, just gone. A man came for him the next morning. Not Diddy, someone else. A driver, dark sunglasses, no words. The boy said he was 6 then. That was when the moving started. He lived in 10 houses by the time he turned 12. Each one different but the same. always by the water, always white walls and long driveways, always the same type of furniture, low-back chairs, glass tables, and cameras in the corners, tucked just far enough into shadows to pretend they weren't there. The caretakers changed often. Some had names, some didn't. A few were kind, but most followed rules. Strict ones. He said there was a handbook once, laminated with a set of codes like L1 and S5. He wasn't allowed to read it, but one of the caretakers left it out once by mistake. There were rules for the children. No real names, no asking questions, no leaving your room after lights out unless escorted, no crying in front of guests, and the guests were always coming, not in huge crowds, usually 3 or 4 people at a time, men in suits, women in dresses too tight to walk in, always arriving by boat or black car with tinted windows. They never stayed overnight, not officially, but sometimes the children were moved to a separate wing for the night, or the locks would click a different way. He said the parties were quiet but intense, low music, always, lots of whispered conversations, laughter that never reached the eyes. He remembered scents, cologne, sweat, perfume so thick it stuck to his pillow for days. He remembered cameras that blinked red when recording. He remembered one woman who used to bring him small hard candies in a velvet pouch and tell him to never eat them unless she said so. The boy's voice never wavered as he described these things. The courtroom, however, was breaking slowly. One of the stenographers paused twice, hand trembling at the keys. The second one was replaced mid-session. The third never returned from her bathroom break. Then the boy spoke about the island. It didn't have a name, not officially. No address, no flag. Just a stretch of land about a mile long with a single compound in the center. A villa, sleek and modern, perched on a slope overlooking the ocean. He said he was brought there when he was 9, kept there for the better part of a year. It was the only place that didn't rotate the caretakers, the only place where the rules were spoken, not printed. He was told the villa belonged to the architect. No one used Diddy's name there, only that title. The architect had a room that no one else could enter, not even the staff. A white door with a gold lock. Behind that door, the boy said, was a long hallway lined with mirrors on both sides, and something he only ever referred to as the red light. He said he was taken to that hallway once, just once, and when he came out, the staff wouldn't look him in the eye for a week. Then, quietly, almost like he was reading from memory, he described the caretaker who tried to help him. She was young, younger than the others. She hummed songs when she thought no one was listening. She taught him how to wrap his hands around a spoon to stop them from shaking. One day, she slipped him a number written on the inside of a juice box tab and told him that if he ever got to a phone, to ask for a man named Marcus. 2 weeks later, her body washed up on the shore of a nearby marina. The death was ruled accidental, no further investigation. The courtroom was quiet as the boy paused, then reached into the small folder placed beside him and pulled out a photograph. It was worn at the edges, a little faded from age. In the picture, a group of adults stood near the railing of a yacht. Most of their faces were blurred in the official court display, redacted for legal reasons. But one figure stood out, a child in the background, barely waist-high, standing behind one of the blurred celebrities. A hand gripped the child's shoulder. Diddy's hand. You didn't need to see the whole face to know it was him. The bracelet, the ring, the distinctive scar along the wrist bone. The boy in the photo was wide-eyed, mouth slightly open like he'd just been told to smile but hadn't figured out how. It was enough. The judge called a recess 5 minutes later. During that break, I saw one of the courtroom officers, the same man who escorted the boy to the stand, step outside and vomit in the hallway trash can. He didn't come back after that. The boy didn't cry, not once. When court resumed, the judge's voice was lower. He addressed the room with caution, reading off a prepared statement that certain names and affiliations would be redacted pending formal review, and that retaliation against any witness, including the boy, would be prosecuted to the fullest extent. Just before adjournment, a clerk from records received a package, no return address. The seal bore the logo of a clinic registered in a foreign jurisdiction, somewhere off the coast, in a territory known for protecting assets and identities. Inside was a blood sample, 2 vials, one marked with the boy's case number, the other with an unknown code. Preliminary results showed a match. And someone else. Someone whose name had not yet entered the courtroom, but whose DNA had already changed everything. Chapter 6. 2 Sons. The call came in before sunrise. I remember because I was already awake, sitting at my kitchen table in the dark, rereading transcripts I couldn't seem to forget, even if I wanted to. The boy's voice still echoed in my head, cold and quiet, every word wrapped in something much heavier than memory, something lived in. Like he hadn't been remembering those things, he'd never left them in the first place. But it wasn't just that keeping me up, it was the package, the second blood vial, the sealed report handed off to the judge at the end of the previous day's session. It was the look on his face after reading it. Like a door had opened inside him and something deeply buried had come loose. The call wasn't from the clerk's office, it came from the judge directly. That never happens. His voice was low, direct, stripped of the formal tone he usually carried like armor. He told me to get dressed and be in his chambers within the hour. When I asked why, he only said, "We have another one." By the time I got there, the room was already full. 2 security officers, 1 federal liaison, and a representative from International Legal Affairs. No media, no transcripts, no minutes. The hearing wasn't on the official docket. It was called under Article 8, Emergency Discretion, used in cases involving threats to witnesses, emergent discoveries, or sealed identities that could affect national security. At the center of the discussion was a report, fresh, less than 12 hours old. It had come in from a consulate office stationed in the Caribbean. A young man, name withheld, had walked into the building just before closing the night before, accompanied by a social worker and a private physician. He was about 19 or 20, with a soft voice, visible scarring on his chest and left leg, and identification papers that didn't match any existing national database. What he did have was a folder. Inside that folder were the same paternity test forms submitted by the boy in our courtroom, except these were from a different lab, dated 5 years earlier. They weren't public, they hadn't been used in any custody or legal claim, but they were authentic. The markers matched the same paternal DNA profile we had on file for Diddy. In the blood samples sent in anonymously 2 days ago, it matched both young men. What made the room go silent, though, wasn't just the test results. It was the photographs that came next. The young man had provided over a dozen images, each one taken in and around a property that had no registered address but matched almost perfectly the description of the island from the boy's testimony. Same villa layout, same cliffside overlook, even the white door with the gold lock. But this wasn't from memory, this was current. The villa still existed, and someone had been using it as recently as 6 months ago. The judge sat with his hands folded in front of him, eyes narrowed, thumb tapping slowly against the edge of the table. He didn't ask how this was missed. He didn't rage at the system. He just asked one question. Who's protecting that place? No one answered. Across the river, in the depths of MDC Brooklyn, Diddy had collapsed. It started as a routine check-in. Officer Deeks had gone down the east wing to deliver a meal tray and found him sitting on the edge of his cot, unmoving, not asleep, not reactive, just staring at the wall like the paint had begun speaking to him. When Deeks called his name, there was no response. When he stepped closer, Diddy whispered something, not to the officer but to himself. I told them not to keep them together. He repeated it again when the nurse arrived, then again when the warden was called down. over and over, like a broken machine stuck on a single instruction. They sedated him, eventually. Not because he was violent, but because he wouldn't stop. His lips kept moving even after the medication took hold, like his mind had broken from some weight it could no longer contain. Later that evening, during a standard sweep of the cell, Officer Deeks found something wedged under the mattress, folded tightly, damp with sweat, scribbled in pen on the back of an old disciplinary form. They're both awake now. Reading 7 times, no punctuation, just the same line bleeding into itself like a mantra. The news of the second son didn't go public. Not yet. The judge knew what a leak like that could do, what it could unleash. But behind closed doors, things moved quickly. A sealed directive was drafted within hours. Coordinates for the island property were extracted from the metadata in the photographs, cross-referenced with maritime drone surveys and flight logs from private aircraft. The judge pulled one agent aside, someone from a task force I wasn't cleared to know by name, and handed him the sealed order personally. It was time to raid the villa. The estate had never been officially tied to Diddy, not directly. The deeds were layered behind offshore holding companies, signed by dead executives and lawyers who hadn't practiced in over a decade. The utilities were paid in cash equivalents, through cryptocurrency wallets routed through at least 4 continents. But the architecture matched the guest records, what few scraps the second son had salvaged, lined up with old flight manifests filed under alternate identities we'd already flagged in the investigation. It wasn't a home, it was a vault of silence. Back in the courthouse, we prepared for the fallout. The second boy had agreed to fly in under a protection agreement. A private airlift had been arranged. He would arrive within 72 hours, assuming no interference. The judge ordered a secondary witness chamber to be secured. I was tasked with helping prepare the documents for a revised case structure. It wasn't just about abuse anymore. It was about concealment, illegal custody, cross-border trafficking, evidence suppression on a level we hadn't fully grasped before. And then came the question I hadn't expected. Was there a third? No one said it out loud at first, but we all felt it. If one child could be hidden and denied for 20 years, and another had been tucked away halfway across the world in a villa like something out of a fever dream, then why would it stop at 2? That night, I went back to the sealed thumb drive, watched one of the longer clips, one I hadn't been able to stomach the first time. It showed a room I hadn't seen in any of the other videos, smaller, walls painted soft gray, a mural of clouds on the ceiling. In the far right corner sat a chair, tiny, with straps hanging off the sides like someone had tried to disguise it as a toy. 3 children's voices could be heard faintly in the background. Laughing, but not together. One voice didn't match the rhythm. It was behind, like it had just arrived late to the joke. The metadata timestamp placed the video in 2005. That was the year one of Diddy's offshore accounts had registered a purchase of juvenile furnishings and sensory installations through a German supplier known for customizing facilities for nonverbal or special needs children. My hands shook as I paused the video. The deeper we went, the more it became clear. This wasn't about one child's testimony. This was about how many had been forgotten, and why some people were only now remembering. Chapter 7. The Raid. The storm came just before dawn. Not the metaphorical kind, not the one we'd all been bracing for in court, but a literal one, rolling in thick from the coast, drenching the air around the Caribbean estate in mist and salt. It was the kind of storm that swallowed noise, made time stretch long and slow. That morning, when the federal team descended on the island villa, they moved like shadows, black coats against gray wind, boots soaking in muddy gravel, rifles cradled low. No one spoke once they reached the perimeter. There had already been enough said in the hours leading up to this moment. The estate was everything the testimonies said it would be, remote, surrounded by trees that looked like they hadn't been disturbed in decades. A tall, wrought iron gate with no signage, no address plaque, no driveway, just thick brush and a barely visible path leading up to a pale stone villa built low into the hill, the sea crashing behind it like a warning. The key to the raid's success was the silence. No forewarning, no leaks. The warrant was hand-delivered from Washington, routed through judicial channels that bypassed even the local government. They'd learned their lesson from earlier leaks. This time, they told no one until they were already on the ground. The first breach team took the front, 2 more circled to the rear. One agent later reported that when they entered through the side annex, the lights were already on. No alarms were triggered, no dogs, no residents. Just rooms, cold, empty, and arranged in a way that didn't feel accidental. Everything inside was too clean. The furniture was minimalist. The windows were open, letting in damp sea air. There were children's toys in one of the corner rooms, blocks, puzzles, a rocking horse polished so frequently it reflected the flashlight beams like glass. But no dust, no fingerprints, and nothing that answered the bigger question: who had been living here recently? They found the basement entrance behind a bookshelf in what appeared to be a library, one of those remote-controlled mechanisms with a magnetic switch behind a leather-bound volume labeled Behavioral Conditioning in Adolescence. Behind the wall, a narrow stairwell led downward, deeper than expected. 33 steps, concrete, damp with mold. The basement wasn't just storage. It was infrastructure. Rooms carved into the rock, soundproofed with foam padding and layers of lead sheeting. Underground architecture meant for isolation. In the center room, the agents found sealed file cabinets, 5 rows, locked, tagged with color-coded stickers. Most were empty or burned out from within, charred beyond recovery. Someone had tried to erase the past, and not just hastily. This had been methodical. Tapes melted, hard drives cracked and soaked, USB sticks smashed with hammers, but not everything was destroyed. In a back chamber, partially hidden behind a false wall, one of the agents found it. A drawer compartment sunken behind a steel panel. It required a biometric reader. It had already been triggered before the team arrived, left slightly ajar. Inside were laminated pages, old, wrinkled, stained by humidity but legible. The pages were lists, some first names, some initials, others only numbers. Each entry was followed by a date and a single letter in bold red ink, X, O, or T. There were over 70 names on the master list. Most of them had never appeared in any official case file. Others matched loosely with sealed juvenile records. Children who'd been reported as runaways, abandoned, or removed from guardianship under unclear circumstances. The T entries had the oldest dates, many from the late 1990s. The X entries were mostly between 2005 and 2011. O was more sporadic, often accompanied by a handwritten note in the margin, words like incomplete, reversed, or withheld. No one in the raid team spoke as the lead agent photographed every page, uploading encrypted copies in real time to the federal server back on the mainland. There was too much to process on site. They boxed up what they could, marked the rest for forensic retrieval. Back in the States, as the evidence was in transit, the courtroom came to life. The boy had been silent for 2 days. By choice, he had been offered a hotel under guard, a secure suite in a safe house. He declined, chose to remain in the courthouse's private holding chamber, away from cameras and people. When the agents confirmed the list had been found, the judge convened a special session. The gallery remained empty, but this time the door was locked from the inside. The boy sat in the same neutral position, hands folded in front of him, a single sheet of paper resting on the table. He didn't wait for permission. He simply began reading. The names came softly, one after the other. Some only first names, some initials, some full. He didn't pause between them, just let the syllables fall like stones in water. You could tell he wasn't reading off the paper. It was all memory. With each name, a court officer seated near the wall received a silent notification. A single word from one of the agents at the villa, sent via secure channel. Found. Then again. And again. Found. Found. Not all of them, but enough to make the room go still. Enough to confirm that this wasn't a list of fiction. These were real people, some of them still children, some now grown, some unaccounted for. Presumed dead, forgotten, but now found. And somewhere beneath the concrete of MDC Brooklyn, in a solitary cell surrounded by reinforced steel and surveillance that still couldn't explain the scrawled notes found under his pillow, Diddy began to come apart. It started with silence. Guards said he stopped responding to meal delivery, refused to speak. Then came the movement. Slow at first, clawing at the collar of his jumpsuit, scratching along the seams. When they checked on him, he was pacing in slow circles, muttering into his hand. By nightfall, the muttering had turned into yelling. He demanded to speak to the second one, repeated it over and over, like the phrase was stuck in his throat and he couldn't cough it up. Then he changed it. "Where's the third? Where's the third?" He asked it like it was a riddle. Only he understood. When the guards tried to sedate him, he backed into a corner, fingernails clawing at the wall until his fingertips bled. One of the guards, Ramsey, the same one who escorted him to medical weeks ago, filed a confidential report that same night. It included the phrase Diddy had screamed before they forced him into restraints. They were never supposed to meet. And then the scream turned into a whisper. I told them not to keep them together. In the courthouse, the boy finished reading the names. He stood slowly, folded the paper and handed it to the judge. No dramatic close, no final statement, just quiet, deliberate motion. He walked back to the side hallway where his escort waited. But before he reached the door, the court clerk received a call. I saw her pale before she could even speak. The agents at the villa had found another room, beneath the flooring, under a stone panel in what used to be a study. Inside it was a small storage chest, no lock. Inside, a collection of school ID cards, old Polaroids, and one laminated hospital form from 2005. It was a missing child's report. The case had been marked closed years ago, the official cause listed as drowning. The body had been identified by dental records. Autopsy signed by a coroner, later removed from his position after a separate scandal. The name on the report was on the list the boy had just read aloud. And the autopsy? Foraged, Chapter 8. Goodbye forever. The courtroom didn't feel like the same place anymore. It wasn't just the way people looked at each other. Quiet, careful, unwilling to let their eyes linger too long. It was the feeling in the walls, the kind of feeling you get when a storm finally ends and all that's left is the wreckage. Everything was softer, muted, like even the furniture had gone still in anticipation of what was about to happen. The lights were dimmer than usual, not because anyone turned them down, but because the sun outside refused to rise properly. Overcast, gray, heavy in the sky, as if the world itself had been holding its breath too long. They brought Diddy in through the north corridor, the one typically reserved for high-risk defendants or patients under medical supervision. He wasn't handcuffed. He didn't need to be. He was wheeled in, slow and unresponsive, slouched in a chair with a strap across his lap that no one pretended was anything but necessary. His hair had grown out in patches, graying unevenly at the temples. His beard was untrimmed, curled against the collar of his jumpsuit. But the strangest part wasn't his appearance. It was the sound, or lack of it. He was muttering again. The same phrase, soft, barely audible over the creak of the wheels and the slow shuffle of the guard pushing him forward. But those of us who'd heard it before knew what it was. I told them not to keep them together. The judge was already seated, a thick folder in front of him, hands clasped over a page he hadn't turned yet. He looked older than usual, not tired, resigned, as if everything he had believed about law, justice, and consequence had tilted just enough to throw the entire world out of balance. He waited until Diddy had been parked beside the defense table before speaking. His voice was calm but different, the kind of calm that comes after fire, not before it. This court acknowledges the protected testimony submitted over the past 8 days, as well as the newly surfaced identities of previously unrecognized individuals biologically and legally connected to the defendant. He paused, letting the weight of the words settle. Based on these findings and the evidence recovered during the federal operation on the aforementioned offshore property, the structure of this trial has fundamentally changed. No one interrupted, not the lawyers, not the officers, not even Diddy, whose eyes stayed fixed on the marble floor like it was the only surface that wouldn't collapse beneath him. The judge went on, summarizing the alterations to the original charges. The language shifted, words like misconduct and neglect replaced by trafficking, conspiracy to conceal, international custodial interference. He mentioned jurisdictional anomalies that would now need to be coordinated through 3 separate federal agencies. A special session was already scheduled with the Department of Justice to determine whether portions of the trial would proceed in a classified setting. But that wasn't what everyone came to hear. The boy stood without being called, just like before. He didn't ask permission, he didn't wait for a nod or a gavel. He stepped forward, past the witness podium, past the prosecution table, and stood near the bench itself, facing the judge but looking just beyond him, at something only he could see. "I never wanted to be here," he said again, quietly, just as he had days before. But this time, he kept going, and if you ask him, he won't deny it anymore. He's not scared of prison. He's scared of silence. That's where all of us live now. There was no emotion in his voice, no righteous anger, no bitterness, just a soft, hollow truth. It didn't shake the room. It didn't need to. It filled it. Diddy stirred for the first time. His body shifted against the restraints, just slightly, as if the words had pulled something loose inside him. He turned his head, not toward the judge, not toward the boy, but toward the empty space between them, like he was trying to see a ghost. His mouth opened. Everyone froze. And then, through lips dry and cracked, came the only words he'd spoken to the room in days. "I told them not to call me father." It wasn't shouted. It wasn't even directed at anyone. It was just released, like it had been waiting in his throat, festering, until it finally clawed its way out. One of the younger clerks dropped her pen. A security officer turned his head away like he couldn't look anymore. Even the judge looked like he wanted to say something, but didn't. What do you say to that? What words exist that could answer a line like that? The boy didn't respond. He didn't flinch. He simply stepped back, folded his arms across his chest, and waited. The judge nodded once, then addressed the court. Per emergency review, the contents of File Delta will now be unsealed. That name had floated in whispers for the past week. File Delta. A placeholder label recovered during the raid. A container found beneath a slab of concrete in the villa's underground storage, marked with a symbol that didn't match any law enforcement catalog. The agents who opened it, 2 men and a woman, hadn't said a word since, not to their supervisors, not to their families. Not even to each other. They weren't under a gag order, they just stopped talking. Inside the file had been photographs, audio reels, a handwritten ledger with names, dates, codes no one could interpret, and something else. Something sealed in an envelope marked only with a drawing. One single line, coiled like a snake or a strand of DNA, drawn over and over until the ink bled through the paper. We didn't know what it meant, but the judge had made his decision. The courtroom was dismissed, trial proceedings delayed indefinitely. Diddy was ordered to be transferred to a higher security psychiatric facility, pending reevaluation. He didn't resist. He didn't move, just stared straight ahead, that same phrase echoing from his lips in a rhythm no one could follow anymore. I told them not to keep them together. The guards wheeled him out, slow and silent. And in that stillness, the boy turned. He didn't say goodbye, didn't look at anyone else, just walked toward the back of the courtroom, his shoes soft against the polished floor. No chains, no escort, just one step after another, like he'd been walking this hallway in his dreams for years and was only now reaching the end of it. When he reached the doors, he paused, not to turn around, not to reflect, just to breathe. One last moment inside the place where everything changed. Then he pushed them open and left. And the seat Diddy once occupied, the one that had carried so much weight, so much fear, so much power, sat empty. No sound, no voice, just echoes,